Hey, what's up guys? Welcome to this video where we will be talking about hypertrophy. Specifically, we're going to talk about some of the fundamentals of hypertrophy programming, some of the stuff that are very fundamental and very basic, whether we're talking about college, university, physiotherapy school, or I don't know, most areas, most places where people get educated. I just feel that these very fundamental physiological stuff are taught in a way that are not very practical. Where somebody comes to me, a client comes to me, and they show their previous training program, and I take a look at it, made by somebody who is, maybe has a master's in sports science or has a bachelor degree in physiotherapy. I take a look at the training program, and all I see is nonsense. I think the underlying reason for that is because people ignore the physiology behind hypertrophy. And these are some stuff that everybody must know, whether they're training for themselves or they're actually having clients and they are prescribing training, specifically hypertrophy training, for other people. So I've been waiting a long time to make this video and finally got the time to do it. Without further ado, let's get into it. Today, we're gonna talk about the purpose of any general training program, any training program. And then after that, we're gonna focus a little bit in what actually stimulates hypertrophy, what are the spices that we have to put in our soap to make the soap nice and delicious, to make our hypertrophy programs effective. After that, we're going to take a look at fatigue and how that relates to hypertrophy. Why is that important? Why we should understand just enough about fatigue mechanisms to make effective training programs. And then we're going to take a look at proximity to failure, low versus high load training, workout duration, and a lot of other stuff that relate to managing fatigue compared to the hypertrophy stimulus that we create within a training program. At the end, we're going to take a look at periodization, and one other thing that we're going to do is we're going to take a look at the sample from real life and how some of the very famous people on internet make training programs that doesn't really add up once we understand the physiological mechanisms behind stimulating hypertrophy. So the purpose of any training program ever made within any sport is to manage the stress, aka the stimuli. We don't want to give anybody too much stimuli or too much stress, because it would be like watering a plant too much, which is gonna eventually lead to that plant dying. You may have seen this model, which is called general adaptation syndrome model. It's an old as model that kind of reflects reality, but not always. According to this model, we can see that whenever we are exposed to a new stimuli, we're gonna go through this alarm phase where our body, our mind experience a shock to this new stimuli, and then as a result to that shock, we're gonna build up some resistance, we're gonna get some adaptations, and if that stressor or that stimuli keeps increasing more than what we can handle, we may experience exhaustion, and if it keeps going, we may die or need medical help. Again, it's just a model, it's not gonna reflect reality, but I think it makes good sense. If we go back to sports science, one of the very common models that is used is the fitness fatigue model. The fitness fatigue model kind of shows how whenever we are going through a workout or whenever we are going through a phase of training, we're going to build up some fatigue. And as a result, our performance is going to drop because we are literally tired, right? We can't perform as good when we are tired. Whether we're talking about tired in the sense of feeling tired, the subjective feeling, or the objective fatigue that builds up within our body. Our performance is gonna drop, but once we stop working out, or once we kind of get rid of the fatigue in that training phase, our fitness is gonna improve itself, because our performance is going to increase. Now, one other benefit of managing fatigue is, of course, managing the risk of injury. Now, I don't know who said this quote, but I think it's very valuable, and it says that you can only train as hard as you're able to recover. And this is just fucking golden, because a lot of people, they just think that the harder you train, the better it is, the more sets, the better it is, the more volume, the more hypertrophy, and that's not true. And we're gonna take a look at why that's not true. If we compare training to your economy, we can kind of say that your expenses should kind of match your income, your earnings. Now, if you want to be rich, you have to be in a surplus, meaning you have to earn more than you expend. Either you have to minimize your expenses or maximize your earning. What does this mean inside the gym? Well, if you want to gain muscle, you have to maximize the hypertrophy stimulus you get from each training and minimize the amount of fatigue you experience from each training session. How do we do that? Well, one thing is that we are very different. Human beings are very different in our genetics, in our lifestyle, in our nutrition intake, and that's gonna make it difficult to come with a one size fit all answer. So we have to individualize and sometimes improvise based on our physiological understanding of hypertrophy. And again, there's no one size fit all, and sometimes I see some training program templates online which are called evidence-based that you can purchase, and I just shake my head because it's just such a stupid idea that science can give us a clear-cut answer to what's the definite amount of training that we have to do in order to stimulate hypertrophy. Is it 10 sets per week or is it 15 sets per week? Why is that stupid? Because again, we are all different and we are gonna respond differently to training. And also, training in itself is not very definitive. You know, we can train in different manners. Let's say we are gonna train quads. There's a huge difference if you're training, let's say, a leg extension with accumulating resistance, which is going to be a resistance band on a leg extension, versus doing squats or hack squats. The stimuli that we get is going to be very different, and the amount of damage, the amount of fatigue, and the type of fatigue we're going to experience from those two exercises is going to be very different, and is going to have a meaningful effect on the way we're gonna recover from those different exercises. So whenever I see a meta-analysis or a study trying to figure out what's the optimal volume for hypertrophy, I'm just thinking, okay, for whom, which exercise, which kind of resistance, what are their nutritional intakes? And there's just so many things to consider. And I think that's where studies and evidence-based training has its limitation. Now, that being said, there are things that are universal, and that is our biology. Unless we have some kind of pathology or some kind of sickness that hinders our ability to recover from a training or hinders our ability to work out, you know, it can even be injury, our biologies are the same, and the way we can stimulate hypertrophy is going to be the same. So by learning the physiological mechanisms behind hypertrophy, we can have a framework that can allow us to find the right amount of training for each individual in each specific context. So what mechanisms are proven to stimulate hypertrophy? Well, let's take a look at it. Mechanical tension. I have heard the term mechanical tension, and to make it more understandable, just think about the force that is trying to pull something apart. So whenever we are lifting something, the external force, it can be the weight, it can be the body weight. If you're doing a pull-up, for instance, the force we are fighting, it's creating some kind of tension on our muscles, and that tension is going to be detected inside the muscle, and through different pathways is going to signal a hypertrophy stimuli. Now, with all respect for the evidence-based community, some of the biggest people within the evidence-based community, they sometimes fool themselves and fool their followers. Over here we have Brett Contreras, who is a PhD, by the way. I have a ton of respect for him. He has invented one of the best exercises ever made, the hip thrust. But he also has some shady sides, because at some point I remember he put this model out that he called Mechanisms of Hypertrophy Pyramid. It was a few years ago, and back then some people still believed that there were 3 ways to stimulate hypertrophy. I saw this theory be reposted by Brad Schofield, who is a very respected PhD within sports science, specifically within the science of hypertrophy. And he put this slide out, writing current theory ? At least Brad Schofield, he had the question mark at the end of this hypertrophy model. But Brett, he didn't even do that. He put it out just as if it was straight up facts. The thing is though, we have enough evidence showing that the only thing that drives hypertrophy or stimulates hypertrophy is mechanical tension. In fact, as far back as the sports science on hypertrophy goes, mechanical tension is the only thing that has been proven again and again and again to stimulate hypertrophy. If you take a look at metabolic stress and try to define that for a second, metabolic stress is basically the accumulation of metabolites inside our muscles as we work out. You see, because we have to do this, you see, muscles, they turn chemical into mechanical forces, all right? So whenever they're working, there's going to be some byproducts such as lactate, phosphate, hydrogen ions, reactive oxygen species. And I'm not just throwing these terminologies out to make myself sound smarter. This is just metabolites that accumulates inside the muscle. I just named a few of them. So this is stuff on their own, they can't stimulate hypertrophy. If they did, we could take lactate, we could inject it inside our muscles, and we would see growth. And we have studies that have done that, and they actually don't see any growth. They don't see any anabolic or they don't see any hypertrophy happening from that alone. But the accumulation of metabolites can actually lead to peripheral fatigue. What's peripheral fatigue? Peripheral fatigue refers to the type of fatigue that happens inside our muscles because of these chemical processes. Now, this kind of fatigue that happens inside the muscle is gonna create 2 situations. One thing is that it's gonna increase our effort. It's gonna make us feel that we have to exert more energy and contract the muscle harder. Whenever we are contracting a muscle harder to, let's say, move an object or work the muscle statically or isometrically, we're gonna activate more muscle fibers through activation of high threshold motor units. Okay, just think about it as activating a lot of muscle fibers. Whenever we are trying to stimulate hypertrophy, we want to activate as many muscle fibers as possible. So it's a good thing. Now, another situation that happens because of the accumulation of metabolites that leads to peripheral fatigue is a decrease in shortening velocity in our muscle fibers. So we're gonna lift the object that we are lifting in a shorter velocity. And because of the force velocity relationship, if you guys are known to that, it's gonna increase the mechanical tension experienced by the single muscle fibers. Okay, I know there was a lot of terminologies there, and I hope I didn't lose you guys. But what I'm trying to say is that the increase of metabolic stress is gonna increase the activation of high threshold motor units and mechanical tension. And because of that, we're gonna stimulate hypertrophy. But this means, once again, that the metabolites in itself, they don't stimulate hypertrophy. The only thing that stimulates hypertrophy is mechanical tension. Moving on to muscle damage. If muscle damage on its own was a stimulator of hypertrophy, we could take a hammer, we could beat our muscles, until it turns blue, and then we would wake up the day after with bigger muscles. All right? We could just torture the fuck out of ourselves and get fucking jacked. That's not what it happens. What happens is that whenever we damage a muscle cell, our body is left with two options. It kind of takes a look at the muscle fiber that's damaged, and either it thinks, okay, this muscle is worth repairing, so it starts a repair process and kind of builds the muscle back to where it was before, or it takes a look at the muscle, it realizes, our brain realizes that the muscle is too beaten and it's gonna require too much energy to repair it, so it kind of kills the muscle and removes it from the body or use it for other type of energy demanding processes inside the body. So I know some of you guys were taught at school that muscles grow bigger because they're torn down. We make these macro tears inside our muscles, and because of that they grow bigger. Well, they don't. They really don't. That's just a myth that has been busted for many years ago, and there's very well established studies that show that. So going back to this model over here, we know for fact with good evidence that the only driver of hypertrophy is mechanical tension. Knowing that, we can move on to see what is a set of mechanical tension in reality. All right, so mechanical tension happens mechanical tension is kind of present all the time whenever we contract a muscle, but the adequate amount of mechanical tension happens whenever we are training a very heavy weight that slows down the shortening velocity of a lift. As we see in this video, this guy is lifting 110 kilo on a fucking preacher car, which is just fucking insane. And you can see how, I want you to pay attention to how the lift slows down and the contraction happens in a slow velocity over there. Boom. Now, it kind of makes sense that a lift happens at a slow speed whenever the weight is very heavy, but we can also achieve that slow contraction speed whenever we take a lighter weight. In this case, this is gonna be, I think it's about 25 kilos, and we lift that to failure. You can see, actually over here we can see the velocity. The first rep, it takes 1.2 seconds, and as he moves on to the 11th rep, it takes him about 6 seconds. And as he goes to the last and final rep before failure, it took him about 7 seconds. To stimulate hypertrophy, it doesn't really differ whether we're lifting a lightweight or a heavyweight. In theory, we can say that the last 5 reps before hitting failure are the ones that stimulate hypertrophy. Now, there's going to be a huge difference in the amount of fatigue that we're going to experience comparing light and low load. Now, as we mentioned earlier, if you want to be rich, you have to decrease your expenses and increase your income. And that's what we're trying to do here. We want to recruit as many muscle fibers as possible, and we want to minimize fatigue, because fatigue is going to decrease our level of performance and it's going to increase the amount of time required for us to recover from a workout. So what is fatigue? Maybe we should start by defining what fatigue really is, because fatigue is not the same as feeling tired, as a lot of powerlifters especially define it. Fatigue is actually an objective and temporary drop in our performance. in the case of hypertrophy and the strength training, is going to be a reduction in strength. So we have three types of fatigue. Actually, we have two types of fatigue, and the third one is kind of a post-workout fatigue. Let's take a look at them. The CNS fatigue is the one that's highly misunderstood, because a lot of powerlifters especially call CNS fatigue same as systematic fatigue, and systematic fatigue is actually related to cardiovascular system fatigue. It happens in relation to high demands on our cardiovascular system, which again requires us to use our aerobic energy systems a lot. And thinking about powerlifting or hypertrophy training, the system that we are using, the energy systems that we are using, are mostly anaerobic. So it doesn't really make sense to think about systematic fatigue when thinking about strength training. However, when we think about CNS fatigue relates to the supraspinal fatigue, which is related to your brain decreasing the amount of firing into your alpha neurons down to your muscles, or the spinal fatigue, which is a mechanism where the amount of motor firings coming from your brain are decreased through your spine before leaving down to the muscle. So it's actually very funny. Through some mechanisms, your spine can actually detect how much activity is in your body, and if it evaluates that the activity is too high and there are too much energy demands, it's going to decrease the amount of activity by decreasing the rate firing and motor unit recruitment through the alpha neuron leaving your spine. Now, the CNS fatigue is everything happening before the nerve impulse reaching down to your muscle. Peripheral fatigue is related to everything that happens within the muscle, any mechanisms that reduce the amount of force you can produce. Now, this is mainly related to calcium iron accumulation and the metabolites inside your muscles. Peripheral fatigue, as we mentioned earlier, can actually be a positive thing for hypertrophy stimulation, because it's going to decrease the shortening velocity and it's going to increase our effort, aka activation of high threshold motor units. And we have the third fatigue mechanisms, which is actually a mechanism that happened post-workout. I used to think that muscle damage was something that happened during a workout, and there are muscles getting damaged through workout. I think one of the very common one that we all may know or even have experienced is when we tear a muscle. That's a high degree of muscle damage. But the sustained fatigue or the post-workout muscle damage is actually not a mechanical thing. It's not something that happens because we're lifting something heavy. The post-workout muscle damage happens in response to the accumulation of calcium ions during a workout. In fact, muscle damage happens hours after we're done training. So this is more of a chemical process. Let's try to wrap it up. Muscle damage that happens after workout, it elongates the recovery time of CNS fatigue. Now, CNS fatigue is very important for us, because if there are CNS fatigue present, we can't stimulate those high threshold motor units despite our level of effort, because the brain is just fatigued. And if we can't activate those muscle fibers, we're not gonna get the same hypertrophy stimuli. So our workout is gonna suck despite how hard it feels. Now, we can minimize the recovery demands by reducing muscle damage during a workout. We can do that by reducing calcium ion accumulation during a workout. How do we do that? Well, calcium ion accumulation is, I'm sorry for using these terminologies, but this is just the way to explain it. I don't know how else to explain it. Calcium ions are basically these ions that help us contract the muscle. Without them, we can't really make a contraction. But as we go through a set, they kind of build up. And as we go through, as we get closer to failure, they really start to spike up. I have an infographic over here, which is gonna illustrate that very clearly. So if you guys just for a second ignore these blue lines over here and just focus on the red and green line. The green line over here, it shows the calcium ion accumulation, the buildup of calcium ions through a set taken to failure. And I assume this is a set of 9 repetitions where 9 RER represents the first rep and 0 RER represents the last rep. As you can see, from first rep until 7th ish, the calcium ion accumulation is pretty fucking low. I mean, it increases, but compared to the increase that it has at the last 2 reps before failure, is almost down to nothing. So it's pretty obvious that if you want to decrease the calcium ion accumulation, to decrease the muscle damage, to decrease the CNS fatigue after a workout, it's beneficial to leave a rep or 2 in the tank, aka train with 2 or 1 RER. By leaving 1 or 2 rep in the tank, we can still stimulate hypertrophy without maxing out on calcium ion accumulation. Now, CNS fatigue builds up and withdraws in a faster rate than calcium ion accumulation related fatigue. So, going back to this infographic, if you take a look at this red line, first thing we can see is that these 2 lines, calcium ion accumulation and supraspinal CNS fatigue, they go hand in hand. They kind of follow each other, right? And it's mainly because CNS, our brain, detects the amount of calcium ions inside the muscle. It decreases the amount of fire rating in relation to that. That's very interesting, isn't it? So these 2 things go hand in hand. Now, the supraspinal CNS fatigue, it kind of spikes in a faster rate, but it also falls down the faster rate. And that's really beneficial because we can take a break 3 to 5 minutes and the supraspinal fatigue is going to be down to a lower rate again. That's not what happens with calcium ion accumulation. Calcium ion accumulation takes spikes up in a slower rate and it stays up for a longer period of time. That's why leaving a rep or 2 in the tank is going to make sure that we don't create as much calcium ion accumulation, while we don't have to worry so much about supraspinal fatigue because it's going to drop down if we have longer rest periods. Now, what does that mean? If we have to mitigate the effect of CNS fatigue, we need to have longer rest periods, at least 2 to 5 minutes. This means that having short rest periods, aka starting a new set while the CNS fatigue is high, is gonna decrease the amount of hypertrophy that we can stimulate, because we can't activate as many muscle fibers as we would do otherwise if we had let the CNS fatigue to drop. On the other hand, we can also conclude that stuff like drop sets, where we drop the weight and we continue the set with a lesser weight, and supersets and circus training, monkey training in general is nonsense. You need to have those long rest periods if you want to maximize the stimulus for hypertrophy. Another interesting thing about CNS fatigue is that it builds up through a workout, meaning that the first exercises we do in a workout are the ones that are going to be most effective. So if there's a lift I want to focus on, such as a squat, you have to do it in the beginning of the workout. Another interesting thing is that the duration of a workout is very meaningful for CNS fatigue. So by keeping the workout shorter, we can minimize the CNS fatigue as well. Another funny fact, which is counterintuitive for a lot of you guys, is that lifting lighter weights is gonna build up more CNS fatigue than lifting heavy weights. It all depends on the dose, but if we imagine we're gonna do 10 sets of 5 reps to failure versus 10 sets of 10 to 20 reps to failure, the sets of 10 to 20 reps to failure are gonna create way more fatigue. And that is because of the accumulation of calcium ions inside the muscle, which then would lead to increased muscle damage post-workout, which then will lead to CNS fatigue post-workout. And it's gonna take us forever to recover from that workout. So heavy loads and fewer reps are actually beneficial for decreasing the amount of recovery time needed after a workout. One other thing we can do to decrease the duration of the workout is to divide the amount of sets that we have into more workouts. So instead of doing one workout of 6 sets of squat, we can have two workouts of 3 sets of squat instead. Now I know I talked a whole lot. I hope you guys could bear with me and keep the focus. Now we're gonna take a look at a sample from real life taken from Dr. Mike Israetel. I love Dr. Mike Israetel. He has done a lot of good stuff for the industry, and I respect him a lot. In fact, the whole topic that we're talking about today is being one of the interesting things that he has talked about a whole lot of times. He came up with the term stimulus to fatigue ratio, which is basically what we are trying to understand today. So I pay my respect to him. But at the same time, I found it funny that one of the workout samples that he gave away on his YouTube looked like this. Basically, I went on YouTube, I searched for workout example, and the first thing that popped up was Dr. Mike Israetel. So I took a look at it, and it looks something like this. Now, I have to say that it was a 5-day split, so it was Monday to Friday. I only took the first 3 days because of the sake of duration of this video, and we're gonna take a look at it. Well, if you look at Monday seems to be a leg day, and it consists of high bar squats, lying leg curl, and machine cuffs. I assume machine cuffs is some form of machine for calf raises, and yeah, so looking at the high bar squats, it's actually a great way to start a workout because, as we mentioned earlier, we want to have compound exercises at the beginning of a workout. The thing about compound exercises is that they require us to stop a set because of CNS fatigue and not necessarily because of peripheral fatigue. Think about it this way. If you're doing a leg extension on a machine, you're gonna have to stop a set. If you take that to failure, you're gonna have to stop the set because your muscles can't literally contract anymore, okay? Because it's a very isolated movement. But something as multiple jointed as a squat, you can't really take that to muscular failure. You're gonna fail because you're just tired to do another repetition. It's not that your quads can't extend your knees anymore. And that's a good thing because, as we talked about earlier, CNS fatigue drops down quicker in a faster rate compared to peripheral fatigue. So we don't want to have exercises that increase the peripheral fatigue in the beginning of a workout. We want exercises such as squat, such as pull-ups, such as bench press, things that are multi-jointed and require you to stop the set because of CNS fatigue rather than peripheral fatigue. So that's great. But one thing that goes through all these 3 exercises over here is the rep ranges. Doing 5 reps of a squat is very different than doing 10 reps, a set of 10 reps on a squat to failure. The energy demands are just gonna be way different. So I wouldn't know why it would be beneficial to do 10 reps rather than 5. I would just say 5 to 7 reps with 2 reps in reserve for all of these exercises, specifically for the cuffs, because according to this program we have to do 5 sets of 10 to 20 reps. That's a whole lot of calcium ion accumulation that leads to muscle damage, that leads to CNS fatigue during the coming day. So why not keep it to 5 to 7 reps? Because there is absolutely nothing special about gastrocnemius and soleus that requires us to train them in a different way. The biological mechanisms that lead to hypertrophy in other muscles are going to be applicable to our gastrocnemius and soleus as well. So all 3 exercises, it's going to be 3 sets, 5 to 7 reps with 2 reps to reserve. Why do I decrease the number of reps? Because it's only Monday. If you're going to train too hard, you're going to accumulate too much fatigue, and that's going to take away from the following workouts coming in the next days. On Tuesday though, that's where I really had to shake my head, because on the first exercises in both days are different. Well, on Tuesday you're doing incline bench, on Wednesday you're doing barbell row and pull-ups. They are different from each other, but the second exercise is an upright row for Tuesday and dumbbell lateral raise for Wednesday. These two are basically the same thing. If you're doing a dumbbell lateral raise and you bend your arm, you're now doing an upright row. So the muscles that have been trained are actually the same. You're just doing them 2 days in a row. The same things apply to cable curl, myo reps, and dumbbell curls. These two are basically the same thing done 2 days in a row. Same as dumbbell barbell extension, which I assume is a barbell overhead tricep extension, and cable push down. You're training your tricep 2 days in a row. The crazy thing is though that you're doing 4 to 5 sets of 10 to 20 repetitions, which is just fucking insane, because the amount of muscle damage and calcium ion accumulation that you are creating is just fucking through the roof. And you're gonna do that 2 days in a row, your arm's gonna be dead for the rest of the week. Unless you're not training to failure, or I don't know why on earth would somebody do this, because it's just nonsense. Nobody gets to recover within 24 hours and not from this amount of volume, unless you're on a bunch of crazy steroids. So I would suggest, with all respect for Dr. Mike, I would suggest that we on Tuesday we train upper body. We do the incline bench, we do the barbell row, we do the pull-ups and the dips to train some chest, some front delts, and some back. All 3 sets of 5 to 7 with 2 reps in reserve. Nothing crazy. 4 exercises. It's gonna be short workout. Whereas over here we had 4, 8, 12, 17 sets. I don't know how many reps, because there's a huge difference between doing 10 or 20 reps. But the duration over here is going to be crazy. The duration here is going to be crazy, unless you're doing short breaks, but then you're decreasing the amount of stimuli that you're going to get. So 4 exercises for Tuesday, 3 sets of 5 to 7 reps, 2 RER, nothing crazy. On Wednesday, I would actually take a day off, because your arms are being used here. Now, it would have been different if Monday was an upper body day and Tuesday was a lower body day. We could make an argument that we could finish with the arm day and then take a day off, or still take a day off, let the CNS related fatigue to drop down, and then on Thursday just smash the arms, smash those lateral heads. And over here you can see I do 3 sets of 5 to 7 on dumbbell lateral raises. You can definitely go heavy on those. Again, there's nothing very specific about the lateral part of your shoulder that requires you to train them differently. The only thing that would ever change my mind on using different rep ranges is personal preferences, or if somebody is not disciplined enough to stay to control the weight as it gets heavier. If somebody's a newbie, new at the gym, or somebody who's just mentally not prepared to stay disciplined when the set gets hard, then I would probably use 7 to 9 reps range for ladder raises or arm exercises. Now, one thing I use here that we're not gonna get too much into is the use of cluster sets, one set of 20 reps divided in 4 clusters. We're gonna take a look at the cluster sets in another video, but as I promised in the beginning of the beginning of these slides, we're gonna take a look at periodization for hypertrophy, whether or not it makes sense. One thing we have to understand is that periodization is something that has been made for athletes, for soccer athletes, rugby athletes, basketball players, and they have these different phases where they focus on different qualities of training. So over here there might be off session where they focus on building muscle mass, building strength and power, and then in the peaking phase they probably do less of this stuff and they do more technique. You see the technique and skill training goes up, and then they have a recovery phase. Or in powerlifting where they train with higher volume and then they decrease the volume and do singles and they go into the powerlifting meet. When we're training for hypertrophy, the only thing that we have to take care of is fatigue. And we just talked about how we can mitigate fatigue by changing some of the variables. For instance, the number of repetitions, for instance, with number of reps, and for instance, by the frequencies of which we train by and the duration of a workout. It wouldn't really make sense to change volume for hypertrophy, because as we increase the volume unnecessarily, we're just going to increase the amount of fatigue that we are creating. We're just not going to increase the stimuli and expect a kilo of muscle just to pop up out of nowhere. By decreasing the volume unnecessarily, we're just taking away from the stimuli that would otherwise be beneficial for our muscle growth. The very traditional way to actually periodize is to change the load. Let's say we go from 12 to 15 rep ranges to 10 to 12 rep ranges, down to 5 to 8, and then 3 to 1. That wouldn't really make sense for hypertrophy either, because training with higher rep ranges is actually more fatiguing. I'm gonna dive deep in periodization in another video. I hope you guys like this video. I hope I didn't bore you with all this talk and all this theory. And I really hope that you understand the importance of learning this stuff if you want to help other people. If you are thirsty to learn even more, please sign up for the mentorship. If you have any questions, any comments, anything nice to say, please send me a message, leave a comment. This video is going to be available on YouTube in full length, and see you guys next time. Thanks for watching.